The first body I ever worked was a man pulled out of a collapsed parking structure in Fort Worth. I was 26, 3 weeks into a disaster identification unit, and my supervisor handed me a tray of bone fragments with instructions to identify the man before I identified the cause. It took me 9 days. When I finished, I knew the man had been left-handed, that he had broken his wrist as a boy, that he had spent his last 2 seconds turning toward the sound of the floor letting go. The remains do not lie. People lie about the remains, but the remains themselves only ever reveal what happened. I spent 11 years doing that work before I moved it into the sky. Mortuary astronomy is a term I coined half as a joke on a grant application, and then the joke got funded and then it got famous. My lab reads the dust of dead worlds. The spectra of a burned planet 40 light-years out, or a gram of captured particles from its rubble field, can yield a cause of death, a sequence, a timeline. I autopsied a world called Herrick's Object in 2079 and told the journals it had lost its atmosphere over roughly 600 years, starting from the equator. Nobody could check my work. That never bothered me. The dust does not lie either. So when the object came down out of the Perseus vector, decelerating, I understood why my name went on the crew list. Everything about it said tomb. It was a cylinder some 30 kilometers long, dark, old, past reckoning, and it arrived breaking under its own power with nobody alive at the controls. That was the assumption anyway, and it was a reasonable one. Machines outlast their makers. We had all seen the same estimates. The hull was gouged in ways that suggested millions of years of transit. Whatever built it was dust. Dust was my department. The press called it Kestrel because a survey astronomer's daughter liked birds. The catalogue designation was a string of letters and numerals that nobody used twice. 4 months before we reached it, Kestrel had gone in close to the sun on a grazing pass that shaved the corona. During that pass, 3 separate solar observatories recorded a mass injection event. Something went out of the object and into the convective zone. The official theory was refueling, a scoop operation, exotic but explicable. On the transfer out, the injection profile looked less like a scoop than an implantation. I kept that thought to myself. I was 6th priority on a 4-man manifest, there to sample dust, and the commander had made the pecking order clear before we cleared lunar orbit. The commander was Roy Hutchins, ex-Navy, and he treated the mission plan as binding. He carried sealed orders in the command safe. We all knew the envelope existed because Glenn Carter, our flight engineer, had helped inventory the safe, then made sure none of us could forget it. Mike Denton flew us. Denton would stay with the ship during the initial boarding. That was in the plan too. We came up on Kestrel's airlock trench on a Tuesday. Ship's calendar, 41 light minutes from Earth. Every question we sent home took 41 minutes to arrive and 41 to answer. We were talking to the past, always, and the past was talking back to a version of us that no longer existed. My first task was the hull. Carter rigged the sampling frame while I ran the resonance package through its calibrations. Isotopic resonance is my own instrument, built in my own lab. It reads decay signatures and bound trace elements the way I once questioned bone, tracing where matter has been, what light has fallen on it, and how long it has been falling through the dark. I pulled 3 cores of hull-face dust, fed them to the analyzer, and sat in the trench with my boots magnetized to a surface older than the sun. Older than the sun. I sat with that for an hour. The bound dust in those cores carried signatures from a dozen stellar neighborhoods, layered like sediment, and the deepest layers predated our system's formation. I had spent my career autopsying the oldest bodies anyone had ever put on a table. This one made all of them children. "You're smiling," Carter said over the suit channel. He was coiling cable at the frame, a body length from me. "I can see it through the visor. That's the face my kid makes at a birthday cake." "It's older than the sun, Glenn." "Yeah, well, so's Hutchins." He clipped the coil to his harness. "Boss wants a cut point on the lock in 20 minutes. He's already asking why the frame's not up. The frame never went up. While Carter was still talking the second anchor, the airlock opened on its own. There was no drama to it. A seam I had catalogued as a seal groove split along its length, and a section of hull the size of a garage door swung inward on nothing I could identify as a hinge. Light came out. Warm light, sunlight-coloured, with a spectrum matching Earth daylight at noon to within a fraction of a percent. The chamber beyond held pressure. Our suit sensors read it before any of us spoke. Nitrogen-oxygen mix, 1 atmosphere, 21 degrees. Automated response, Hutchins said on the command channel. Proximity trigger. Nobody moves. I was looking at the doorway. I am a measurements man, so I measured it. 2 meters 10 by 90 centimeters. Human proportions with a handspan of clearance. And the seam I had catalogued. I had catalogued it because my cores came from beside it, and the dust in the groove was undisturbed, meaning that seam had not opened in a very long time. Yet the aperture fit us. The air fit us. The light fit us. The dimensions were chosen recently, Commander, I said. Meaning what, Larson? Meaning the automation measured us first. Nobody answered that. Denton, back on persistence, recited the abort criteria over the link, and none of them had triggered, and Earth was 41 minutes away in each direction. Hutchins looked at the doorway for about half a minute. Then he did what the mission plan said to do with an accessible interior volume. He took Carter and me inside, weapons stowed, cameras running. The lock chamber cycled us through into the interior, and I stopped being a scientist for a few seconds, because no training holds up against that view. The inside of the cylinder was a valley that curved up on both sides until it closed overhead. 30 kilometers of landscape rolled into a tube, rotating just enough to hold us at a third of a gravity. Along the inner surface, in both directions as far as the lamps and the interior lighting would show us, stood chambers. Sealed volumes, each the size of a stadium or larger, walled in something transparent, each one holding terrain. A slope of red vegetation under a lid of orange haze, a black sea lit from below, with structures rising out of it like drowned scaffolding. A plain of white crystal under strobing violet sky. Dozens of them. Each chamber kept its own weather, its own light, its own physics of colour, and between them ran open galleries of dark stone floor, silent, swept clean. Carter stopped at the boundary between 2 exhibit walls and sent a diagnostic puck rolling ahead of us. It reported the same 21 degrees and 21% oxygen as the lock. He reeled it back through the open doorway behind us. The numbers changed together at the threshold, as if a line had been drawn through the air. The gallery showed no visible vents, pressure doors, or measurable circulation. Kestrel held it at human conditions as deliberately as it held rain over one world and violet sky over another. Accommodation field, Carter said, inventing the term because engineers dislike unnamed systems. This place isn't habitable. It's making a habitable volume wherever it wants us. Hutchins entered the phrase in the mission log. I entered the fact that the air was equipment. It's a museum, Carter said. It's a mortuary, I said, because I recognized the arrangement. I had stood in facilities like it, preserved specimens, controlled conditions, each case holding what remained of something that would never occur again. Every chamber was a world, and every world in the collection was dead. I would have bet my lab on it. Kestrel had been crossing the galaxy for longer than my species had existed, collecting the estates of the extinct. I started doing what I do. I walked the gallery line with the resonance wand, logging chamber signatures, dictating case notes as if the whole structure were a body on my table. Hutchins let me, because it looked like progress. We covered maybe 400 meters. The nearest chamber on the left held a slope of rust-red vegetation under a lid of amber haze, and among the vegetation, on a rise of packed soil, stood a figure. I took it for a mounted specimen. It was 3 meters of jointed limbs folded under a hooded carapace, positioned upright on the rise, well lit, facing outward, Museum posture, I thought. A display. I brought my lamp up to get the carapace texture on camera. The figure turned toward the light. It rotated its whole mass to face my lamp and brought the hooded structure around with what I can only call attention. Then every joint locked. The hood stayed trained on my light. "Larson, tell me that thing is on a motor." Hutchins had his hand up, the fist signal, freeze. I could not tell him that. The resonance wand was still active in my hand, still sweeping the chamber face. Preservation reads flat. This figure returned warm, active, metabolizing. "It's alive," I said. "Commander, the exhibit is alive. Back to the lock. Keep a walking pace." We turned, and the interior turned with us, in a manner of speaking. The lighting along the gallery behind us, the way we had come, dimmed to a residue, while ahead of us, deeper into the cylinder, a corridor of warm light came up section by section, laying a lit road toward the axis. The message required no translation. The building had heard the commander's order and countermanded it. Carter put it into words for all of us. "I don't think we're the visitors here," he said. "I think we're the delivery." We argued at the dead airlock for 11 minutes. Denton logged every word. Hutchins wanted breaching charges brought over from the ship. Earth could not weigh in for over an hour, round trip. The lock we had entered through remained inert, a wall pretending it had never been a door. The lit road waited. In the end, Carter moved us, reading his consumables out loud. The interior held breathable air. The trench outside held nothing at all. We walked the road. It ran up curve, gallery after gallery, past sealed worlds whose weather I could watch changing as we passed. The road ended at the axis of the cylinder, where the rotation gave almost no weight, in an open volume that I can best call a well. A spherical space perhaps 400 meters across, walled in the same dark mineral as the galleries, with light coming from no fixture I ever located. 9 structures were waiting in the well, drifting in a wide ring. Each one was a cage, an open structure of black mineral struts and translucent bone-colored spans, asymmetrical, no two alike, the largest perhaps 20 meters tall, rotating slowly around its own hollow center. And inside each cage drifted fragments, hundreds in some, thousands in others. Luminous pieces the size of a fist or a skull or a torso, some recognizably organic, a preserved sensory organ, a fossil section of spine that belonged to no vertebrate plan I knew, and some pure light held in shapes that hurt to track. The fragments moved independently, streaming, schooling, sorting themselves in slow currents. When the nearest cage addressed us, its fragments rearranged. They flowed into the volume of the cage and assembled a shape, and the shape was a man. Head, shoulders, the suggestion of a face built from 100 drifting pieces of other creatures' remains. The proportions were nearly right. Nearly. The eyes sat a knuckle too far apart. The mouth was a horizontal seam that moved when it spoke. The sound came from everywhere in the well at once, many voices speaking the same words in the same instant, an overlap of dozens of speech systems producing one sentence together, some of them in registers I felt in my sternum rather than heard. Beneath the loudest voices ran others, older, wrong for any throat. What it said first was my name. "James Larson, you questioned the dead before any other of your kind. The proceeding recognizes you. You took our remains into your instrument. You asked them where they had been and how long they had traveled. That is the questioning of the dead. It confers standing. You are recognized as the witness for your species." Hutchins moved himself forward along the guide rail until his body blocked me from the cage. "I'm the commanding officer of this expedition," he said. "Whatever business this facility has with humanity goes through me and through my government. This man is a technical specialist." The assembled, almost face did not turn to him. What the voices said next reorganized my understanding of every hour since the airlock. "The proceeding against your species opened when you crossed the threshold. All conduct since that moment has been entered. The claim of command you have just made is entered. Your species produces hierarchies of force reflexively in the first minute of contact, in the absence of any threat. The estimate is adjusted. Then it gave us the number, and the threat acquired a scale. The likelihood that your species, permitted to expand beyond this system, commits atrocity of the first magnitude is currently assessed at 61%. Threshold for adverse verdict is 75%. The proceeding will conclude before this vessel departs your star. You are advised that departure occurs in 26 of your days. What does the interval mean? I said. Between 61 and 75. Predictive error. No assessment resolves every available line. Adverse judgment requires likelihood beyond the margin retained for error. Retained in whose favour? In favour of the accused. Your language does not contain the procedural term. The nearest rendering is mercy. Hutchins's hand tightened on the guide rail. Mercy is 14%? Mercy is uncertainty not used as a weapon. The quantity is not fixed. It contracts or widens as evidence is entered. Carter had drifted to my left with one glove hooked on the rail. Adverse verdict, he said. What happens on an adverse verdict? Enforcement is in place. In place where? In your star. Nobody spoke. The voices described the grazing pass and the injection event our observatories had recorded, then explained away. The mass kestrel had fed into the convective zone was a device called the filament, dormant, self-maintaining, distributed through the plasma in a way that made retrieval meaningless as a concept. On an adverse verdict, upon departure, the filament would trigger a flare cascade. Its output figures described the end of Earth as a place that keeps its lights on. Grids, orbits, crops, the works of 400 years, in an afternoon of weather from our own star. This structure is a tribunal, the voices said. It convenes for species at the threshold of interstellar expansion. The chambers you passed hold the witnesses of species previously judged. You will be shown evidence. You will be permitted to challenge it. James Larson speaks for the accused. The proceeding stands in recess until evidence is called. The fragments let go of the man shape and streamed back into their slow currents. The 9 cages rotated in the well, paying us no further attention, the way a courtroom empties around a defendant who has not yet understood that he is one. We made camp that night in a gallery alcove near the entry lock. The tribunal had reopened the road behind us, as if the earlier confiscation had never happened. But Hutchins refused it and kept us off persistence while that thing sat in our sun. He set a watch rotation, transmitted a full report into the 41-minute gap, then took himself to the far end of the alcove with the command tablet and his thumb on the safe authentication and opened his sealed orders alone. I watched him from my bag. He was a long time over that envelope, and when he finished, he did not sleep either. Carter came off first watch and settled against the alcove wall next to me. He had a ration sleeve he was not eating, turning it over against his knee. 61%, he said. We walked in the door and we were already at 61. They said the estimate predates us. Our history is in it. We just adjust it now. You ever do this before? He looked over at me. Not the dust. The other thing. You ever stand up in a room and argue for somebody? I thought about Fort Worth. About all the years of rooms where I stood next to a table and spoke for what was on it. This is who he was. This is what happened to him. The remains do not lie. Every client I had ever represented was already dead. My whole art was posthumous. I've only ever spoken for the dead, I said. Carter put the ration sleeve away unopened. Look on the bright side. 26 days from now, one way or the other, that's fixed. They called evidence on the 3rd day. The summons was light again, a lit road running down curve from our alcove, and at the end of it, a gallery I had not entered, an open floor the size of a hangar deck facing one of the sealed chambers. The chamber behind the transparency was the orange one I had catalogued on the first walk. A slope of rust-red vegetation under a lid of amber haze, rain coming down in slow, heavy ropes. Everything about the light saying heavy world, dense air, far from here. One of the 9 cages had come down from the axis and stood at the gallery's edge, fragments idling in their currents. On the open floor alone sat the exhibit. It was a machine, or the corpse of one. An array of intake towers and manifold trunks, maybe 12 meters across, built to a design logic I half recognized without being able to place it. Then I walked its perimeter, the pattern resolved, and I stopped where I stood. It was an atmospheric scrubber, alien-built and serviced with human-standard tools. Powered driver marks scored the access panels at a familiar gauge. A maintenance placard hung riveted to the primary trunk, corroded nearly blank. The corrosion had spared 4 letters, part of a numeral. The letters were Roman. The entire array was burned. Scorched through in a pattern I knew from my own casework. Flash exposure, one direction, a single event of enormous brightness. Around the burned shadow where the towers had shielded the trunk, the original surface survived, and on the original surface someone had stenciled service dates. The earliest I could resolve was a year, 6 centuries ahead of the one I was living in. Evidence is presented, the voices said. All 9 cages spoke from wherever they were. Distance did not thin that overlap in the slightest. This apparatus was recovered from the world your species designates in its survey catalogues as GL881c. In the timeline assessed, your species reaches that world 140 years after expansion begins. The world is inhabited. Its native atmosphere does not serve your biology. Your species converts the atmosphere. The conversion requires suppression of the native ecology, including its sapient population. This apparatus performed conversion for 200 years before the reclamation event that scorched it. The recovery is physical. You may examine it. Recovered from where? I said. That world is real. I've seen its spectra. Nobody has been there. Recovered from the timeline assessed. Sufficiently probable futures are materially accessible to this tribunal. The apparatus is not a model. Examine it. My gloves found temperature, texture, wear, mass. I spent 4 hours on that floor doing my actual job, and the object remained solid under every test. The burn was consistent across every surface with a single flash event, consistent down to shadowing effects that required forensic expertise to fabricate. The access panels had wear polish, where knees would brace, at the height of human knees. Inside the secondary manifold, I found a repair splice, and the splice was wrong for human hands. A weld laid in a looping pattern by something that gripped from 3 sides, and it had been made after one of the human standard repairs, layered over it. Non-human hands maintaining our machine. Locals, kept on to service the machine strangling their own sky. The object told that story the way remains tell stories, in sequence, in residue, and I could not break it. False evidence has a grain I learned to feel over a lifetime. This had none. The estimate is adjusted, the voices said, when I stepped back from the trunk. 64%. On the strength of my failure to disprove it? That's not how evidence works. On the strength of its consistency. As your species qualified examiner, you examined the apparatus and found no fault. It stands. Then I want the witness, I said. I had been up half the night with the procedural grammar the tribunal had transmitted to our tablets. 100 pages of translated rules, the light lag rendering Earth's lawyers useless. So it had been me and Carter with stylus and coffee bulbs, hunting for anything shaped like a right. We had found one. Your rules. The predictive model for a future atrocity has to be anchored in a completed one, a precedent species. I'm entitled to question the witness whose extinction anchors this model. The fragments in the near cage changed their current, the first behavior I had ever provoked out of one. The anchor witness for this evidence is of the Cathava, the voices said, which is the closest our translators ever got to the name. Their world is preserved in the chamber before you. The witness resides within it. Examination is permitted. Then bring it out here. The witness resides within its world. The tribunal does not adjust a world to suit an examiner. You may enter, or you may waive. I looked through the transparency at the orange chamber, this time with my suit tables open. Surface gravity, 1.9 of Earth's. Ambient pressure, 6 atmospheres. The slow ropes of rain were liquid ammonia solution. Temperature at the floor, -40. My hardsuit was rated for every one of those numbers individually. The margin when stacked together was thin enough that Carter, reading over my shoulder, said, "Don't go in there." Hutchins came down the gallery while the gear was still being ferried over from the ship, and he watched Carter talk me into the hardsuit. He made his position a matter of record on the open channel. He considered the proceeding coercive theatre, formally opposed risking crew to participate, and had noted for Earth that a tribunal hiding its witnesses behind 2 gravities of poison was conducting an ordeal. He was right about the last part. I have never decided about the rest. Then he checked my seals himself, all of them, twice. The chamber admitted me through a wall that thickened into a passage and closed behind me like flesh closing over a splinter. The gravity came on over the length of the passage, not all at once. The tribunal's one mercy. And by the time I stepped out under the amber sky, I weighed just short of 200 kilograms with the suit, and every piece of that weight reported to my knees. The suit's frame took what it could. The rest was mine. Walking was a project. Plant the leading foot, transfer, let the frame catch the joint, bring the trailing foot through before the knee buckled. The rain fell in ropes because it was heavy and slow, and where it struck my visor it sheeted in a way water never does, crawling, clinging. Visibility ended at maybe 8 meters. Up close, the rust-red vegetation resolved into colonial structures, tubes in bundles that flexed away from my boots as I came. The witness let me walk to it. It stood on the rise where I had first seen movement days ago. The same body plan, 3 meters of jointed limbs under a hooded carapace, at home in weight that was grinding me down by the step, its underside limbs woven into the tube colonies, like a man standing with his hands in his pockets. Up close, the carapace hood formed a sensory bowl of thousands of black bead structures, all of them oriented on me. "You are the examiner," it said. It spoke through my suit receivers in translated words, and under the translation I could hear its actual voice, a percussive muttering from under the hood, like knuckles cracking in patterns. "I'm James Larson. I speak for humanity. I am what remains of the Cathava. You may ask." I had built my examination on the walk over, 1 question per step. I asked how its species had died. It told me, a younger species had come to their sky, needing their world but rejecting its nature. Over 4 generations, the newcomers changed the air. The Cathava ended in maintenance, kept alive in shrinking preserves to service the conversion because they were skilled, until skill no longer justified the preserves. It answered every question. Where were the preserves? What was the younger species called? Had the Cathava fought? Its answers had the permanence of inscriptions. Nothing I asked found an edge. Species that expand, it said, burn the worlds they reach. Ours reached theirs. Yours will reach others. The apparatus you examined is only your version of the machine that stood over my preserve. And while it testified, I did the thing I had actually come in for. The resonance wand rode on my forearm mount. An examiner touches evidence. That is what examiners are for. I braced against the rise with my left arm and let the frame take my weight as if the gravity had beaten me, which it very nearly had. Then I laid my right forearm across the witness's lower limb where it wove into the tube colony. Contact reading, 4 seconds. The wand drank its atomic history while the black beads of its hood watched my face. I asked about the rain to cover the dwell time, and it answered. The reading remained raw while I barely made it out of the chamber. The return passage felt twice the length of the entry. In the last stretch, my right knee gave sideways inside the frame, a sensation like a drawer coming off its rails. I finished on the frame's power with the joint screaming, my breathing loud in my own helmet. Carter caught me at the gallery side and took the suit's weight against the wall with a bracing bar. He got the helmet off without asking in front of the cameras whether I had found anything. By then we both understood what the tribunal had said on the first day. Everything is entered. It was 6 hours later, in the alcove, on my own analyzer, under a thermal sheet with my knee packed in a cold wrap, that I ran the contact reading against my own archive. The tribunal's witness was perfect. Atomically templated, isotopically balanced, a rebuilt cadaver truer to its species than any preserved specimen could be. But a body carries its world in it. Bound trace, environmental dust, the particulate biography that every living thing accumulates from the place that made it. And the cadaver's world was real, is real. A heavy amber planet whose death my own lab had measured from Earth 6 years ago, whose rubble spectra sat in my archive under a survey number. I laid the witness's bound dust profile against the true dust of its own dead world. They did not match. Close, terribly close. The fine structure held isotope ratios that no natural process would shift. The kind of mismatch found only when a body was built somewhere other than where it claims to have lived. In my old work, we had a name for a body staged to support a story. We called it a prop. I sat with the two profiles side by side on the analyzer in a tribunal that entered everything, and I closed the file, and I said nothing to anyone at all. Earth's answer arrived the next morning, 41 minutes stale, in 3 pieces that did not know about each other. The first piece came from the Science Directorate, over the Open Mission channel, signed by Director Paul Whitfield, the man who had put my name on the manifest, a career administrator with a physicist's degree. His instruction was to cooperate fully with the proceeding, contest nothing prematurely, and buy time. Time for what? The message did not say. The second piece was encrypted, addressed to Hutchins alone, routed through a defense relay that was not supposed to exist on our comm plan. Hutchins took it at the far end of the alcove with his back to us, and never summarized it for anyone. The third piece was for me. Whitfield again, private channel, no signature block. A voice message he must have dictated alone in his office, because there was a chair creaking in it, and nothing else. The government of the United States, he said, lacked authority to authorize a private citizen to negotiate on behalf of the human species. Every government on Earth faced the same limit. He repeated that point, then said, "Whatever you end up having to do out there, Doctor, you'll be doing it without authorization." The message ended and I understood that I had just been instructed. I did not tell Whitfield about the mismatch. 41 minutes each way meant that anything I sent home would come back as committee opinion 3 hours later, and the tribunal entered everything. I had no idea whether that included our transmissions, and I could not afford to find out by experiment. The mismatch stayed between Carter and me. We turned it into a project. The tribunal held sessions on its own schedule, a day here, a day skipped there. In the gaps, Carter and I walked the galleries with the resonance wand, sweeping every chamber face we could reach. Contact readings were better, but contact meant entering, and entering meant hardsuit hours we did not have. So we took standoff sweeps through the transparencies, degraded data, enough for the one question that mattered. Did the bound dust in each rebuilt witness match the true dust of its own dead world? Over 6 days, we brought the total to 10 chambers. The 10th held an ocean. Black, total, floor-to-ceiling of the enclosure. A methane sea kept liquid at a cold that made the transparency burn to the touch even through gloves. And the witness of that world lived deep, out of standoff range, a swimming thing we had only seen once as a paleness rising and turning away. To sweep it, we rigged the wand on a tether line down an access shaft the tribunal opened for us at the chamber's rim. A service throat half-flooded, the methane surface standing in it like a lid of ink. Carter ran the winch. I called depth off the line markings. The plan was to dip the wand under the surface, let the witness make one of its passes, take the reading through liquid. The wand went down. The witness came sooner than either of us wanted. The ink lid bulged. The paleness stood up out of it, 3 meters of it, holding station in the shaft with the wand line trailing across its body. The line snagged. Carter braked the winch by hand rather than let the wand rip free, which was the correct call for the mission, and the drum kicked back against the brake with the full drag of the animal on it. The kickback drove the brake lever through his glove against the shaft wall. The glove held pressure. What it did not hold was heat. The wall of that shaft sat near the temperature of the sea, and the impact pressed his palm and fingers against it through crushed insulation for the 4 seconds it took him to get his weight off the lever. He finished the recovery one-handed. He cranked the winch, cursing on a private channel, until the wand came up with the reading whole, and only then did he tell me his fingers had stopped hurting, which both of us knew was worse than hurting. Back at the alcove, I cut the glove off him myself. The last 2 fingers of his right hand had gone the colour of candle wax to the second knuckle, hard to the touch. Frostbite, deep. The med kit could keep it from spreading. It could not give him back what was already gone. That would be a surgeon's problem, on Earth, in months, if Earth in months was still a place with surgeons. He watched me dress it and asked whether the reading was clean. It was clean. "Then we're 10 for 10, he said, and flexed the hand to see what still answered him. "Say it out loud, Dan. I want to hear whether it sounds insane." "Every witness is mismatched. All 10. Same class of error. The bodies are perfect. The bound dust is wrong. They were built somewhere else, then installed, and the memories are worse than the dust." I had been cross-referencing testimony transcripts against the tribunal's own precedent summaries. 10 species, 10 separate extinctions, and every witness tells its death the same way. Same structure. Expansion came, resistance failed, containment was offered too late. It's not memory, Glenn. It's doctrine with a body attached. The dressing made his hand too large for the standard pressure cuff. Denton talked us through a field rebuild from persistence. Split the inner ring, add a second gasket, close the gauntlet around the bandage instead of the wrist. We made it once, pressure tested it, found a slow leak at the little finger side, and made it again. The second held at a 1 atmosphere differential. The suit table would not certify it for chemical immersion or a pressure differential above 2 atmospheres. "Then I don't enter any more chambers," Carter said. "You don't suit up at all," I said. He looked at the 10 clean readings in my analyzer. "That isn't the same instruction." Hutchins restricted him to gallery work. The galleries by then had held human air for more than a week. We treated that as infrastructure. The 11th chamber held the Larson witness. I chose it because the tribunal had praised that species. In the procedural grammar they had transmitted, one precedent species appeared again and again as the counterexample, the success. A species our translators rendered as the Larson, who had reached their own threshold ages ago, weighed the same charges, and accepted containment voluntarily. They had dwindled at home in peace, the grammar said, over 100 generations, and at their end they donated their judges' minds to the Concorde. 2 of the 9 cages in the axis well carried Larson fragments. Their chamber held a savanna of silver grass under a small white sun, and their witness stood in it like a shepherd, a tall radial creature that testified, whenever asked, that submission had been the wisest act in its species' history. The Larson world was in my archive. Their star sat inside my old survey volume, and 6 years before Kestrel arrived, my lab had catalogued the rubble spectra of a dead planet there. Routine work. 1 entry among 400. I pulled the entry. I laid the true dust of the Larson homeworld beside the sweep we had taken of their witness, and then I stopped looking at the witness altogether because the true dust had something in it that made the mismatch question trivial. The Larson world had burned. Flash heating signatures marked the upper crust. Its atmosphere had been stripped. The isotope shifts matched an engineered stellar event. Their own sun turned briefly into a weapon. In a cascade profile I had heard quoted 10 days earlier in the Axis well, when 9 cages described what the filament in our sun would do. They had refused containment. The tribunal had executed their world with the same instrument now sleeping in ours, then built a witness to stand in silver grass and thank them for it. I took it to Hutchins that night. Any response to the evidence would have to pass through his command. He heard all of it at the alcove's map table with the survey plots in front of him, testing the evidence. Could the burn be natural? Could my archive be wrong? Could 2 spectra 6 years apart be honestly confused? The burn was engineered. My archive's error margin was too small to account for it. The spectra were distinct. He tapped the cascade profile where I had overlaid it on the filament's quoted output. The 2 curves sat on each other like a signature and its tracing. "Then it's decided," he said. "You've just proven the verdict is written. They killed the last species that said no, and they built a puppet to say yes for them. That's not a court, Larson. That's a slaughterhouse with a liturgy." He rolled the plots up. "The package comes over from Persistence tomorrow." The package. Until then, Hutchins had kept the word to himself. His sealed orders held a contingency for exactly 1 scenario. The scenario where the object proved hostile and Earth could not respond in time. A shaped nuclear demolition charge, low yield, engineered to drive its output along one axis, currently sitting in a crate in Persistence's hold under Denton's care. Emplaced against the axis well, its shaped output would spare most of Kestrel and destroy the 9 cages. The contingency had been written around a crude model of a hostile machine. Find the control spine. Cut it before the machine could act. Kestrel had given Hutchins a better target than the planners expected. For 9 days, Denton had been correlating field transients from the object against every door. Light change, gravity adjustment, and chamber opening we observed. They all rose from the axis well. Beneath the cages ran the only continuously active trunk our scans could identify, a column of energy and structured field that connected the well to the rest of the cylinder. "The court is sitting on the command bus," Hutchins said. "The charge drives down that bus. It takes the cages and whatever authenticates their orders before the departure sequence. If the filament requires command, no command reaches it." "And the filament triggers," I said. "You don't know that. You know what they told you. In the middle of what you've just proven is a rigged trial. Maybe the trigger dies with the judges. Maybe there's no trigger at all, and the injection was exactly what our people first called it. What I know is that in 15 days that thing departs, and it has never once acquitted anybody, and you found the murder weapon in its history." He strapped the plots into the document case as he said it, and squared the buckles. "I'm not betting 400 years of civilization on the mercy of the thing that did that to the Varison. You'd be betting it on a warhead instead. Roy, the forgery is leverage. It's their own law. Their evidentiary standard says a corrupted witness impeaches the recorded anchors. I've been 10 days in their grammar. The provision is real. Let me put it in front of them. And when they concede your point and convict us anyway, what's your remedy then, counsellor? An appeal?" Carter had been listening from his bag with his ruined hand propped on his chest. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm with Dan." "Your position is noted," Hutchins said. "It's not sentiment, Roy. My fingerprints are on every sweep in that data. Whatever gets argued, I already helped argue it. I'd rather finish the argument than switch to the bomb halfway and get the worst of both." Hutchins looked at Carter's bandaged hand for a moment, then at me. "You have until the package is emplaced," he said. "File whatever you want, but I'm not waiting on their calendar, and I'm not asking Earth because Earth is 3 hours away and this is a command decision. Denton brings it over at first shift." Denton brought it over at first shift. He guided the crate through the lock himself, killed the sled, and checked the tamper seals before he looked at any of us. 18 transients, he said to me. "Every commanded change we've seen starts in that well. Roy isn't guessing about the target. He's guessing about the sun. So are you." He put one hand on the crate. "I can keep Persistence ready and fly us away from a blast, Dan. Our own star is beyond my reach. If there is a control path to cut, this is the only tool aboard that can cut it. And if bringing it inside is the act that convicts us, That was when he met my eyes. Then it will be an act I chose, not an order I hid behind. Following the orders was costing him something he had decided to pay. And that same day the tribunal, which entered everything, told us what our night had been worth. The lit road summoned us to no session. The voices simply spoke in the alcove itself, out of the walls, all 9 cages at once from 4 kilometers away. Weapons preparation has been observed. The estimate is adjusted. 71%. Nobody answered. There was nothing in the grammar about answering. You are advised, the voices said, that the threshold is 75. Hutchins made his run on the 19th day, with the departure burned 6 days out, and the tribunal let him do it. He went up the lit road to the axis with Denton and the package on a powered sled. They wore armor-rated EVA suits and kept their comms on an open channel Hutchins did not bother to encrypt. He made the attempt in daylight because he believed it was justified. I walked behind them the whole 4 kilometers, arguing procedure into his ear, and he answered me twice in total. The 9 cages hung in the well, exactly as always, fragments streaming in their slow currents. The road stayed open, and the well admitted them. Denton anchored the sled to the rim structure. Hutchins began the emplacement sequence with his own hands, arming panel open. The ossuary Concorde answered only by adjusting its number. Deployment of a fission device against this tribunal has been initiated, the voices said. The act is entered, 74%. Enter it twice, Hutchins said, and seated the first anchor bolt. 75 is threshold, I said on the channel, to him, to Denton, to anyone. Roy, you are arguing their case for them. Every bolt is testimony. Every bolt is deterrence. They don't experience deterrence. They experience probability. You're not pointing a gun at them. You're showing them the future they predicted. You're proving the model. 75%, the voices said. Threshold is reached. Summary verdict is available to the tribunal. The word available stopped all 3 of us. Even Hutchins's driver spun down. It meant the tribunal could enter the verdict but had chosen to hold it. In the whole proceeding, they had never revealed a withheld choice, and the sentence hung there like a hand not yet closed. Their response was jurisdictional, housekeeping within the tribunal's rules. The voices said, environmental accommodation for the accused is withdrawn from non-essential volumes, effective now. Essential volumes are the tribunal floor and your point of entry. And 4 kilometers down the curve, the galleries began reverting. Carter was in the galleries. He had stayed behind at the alcove to strike our equipment, one-handed, because the alcove sat in what had just become a non-essential volume. He was 180 meters from the entry lock, in a transit suit rated for vacuum, nothing more, when the gallery he was crossing stopped being a road between worlds and became an annex of the nearest one. The nearest one was the Cathava chamber. 6 atmospheres, ammonia, -40. I heard it start over his channel before anyone understood it. A bang out of the structure around him, repeated, sectional, the sound of seals opening in sequence down the gallery's length. Then Carter himself, reporting it in order. Pressure doors opening on their own, amber haze coming through, he was moving to the lock. Then the pressure front reached him. 6 atmospheres hit one with enough force to throw a man. The front took Carter off his feet mid-stride and put him into the gallery wall, shoulder first. The sound that came over the channel from inside his helmet was structural, his body with the suit frame together. He got up. On the lock's external camera, which Denton had slaved to his sled display, we watched him rise into a world filling around him. Ropes of ammonia rain condensing straight out of the air, sheeting on his visor, visibility collapsing to arm's length, the far end of the gallery already gone in amber. He clipped his line to the wall rail because he could no longer see the lock. He went hand over hand along it. The rail ran on his right, so the ruined hand had to pull. I was running by then. Down from the axis, down curve, 4 kilometers at a third of a gravity, in bounds that my bad knee took like nails. Denton stayed with Hutchins. The channel stayed open. So I heard in my own helmet, in the order it happened, everything the lock camera saw. The rebuilt wrist seal on his right hand was bulked out around the bandage, certified for the gallery we had treated as infrastructure and nothing like the world now filling it. At 6 atmospheres of ammonia, field solutions do not get a vote. 80 meters from the lock, the seal split. Carter reported, "My wrist seal split," then kept moving instead of stopping to clamp it. A clamp took 2 hands. He had one. He traded the wrist for the distance while his suit filled from the arm inward. Ammonia at that pressure against skin does 2 kinds of damage at once. It freezes tissue on contact and converts to base wherever it finds water. A man's body is mostly water. The exposure climbed his arm as cold, then chemical burning. He narrated it as far as the elbow. After the elbow, he stopped narrating. He just breathed, climbing the rail. He made the lock. 19 days into a proceeding designed to weigh our species, Glenn Carter crossed 80 meters of a poisoned, dead world with one working hand in a flooding suit. He made the lock. The lock cycled because it was our point of entry, and the tribunal, precise to the last, had exempted it. I reached the inner door 4 minutes later. Carter was down against the lock wall with the flooded arm across his lap. The suit's interior fogged amber to the neck ring. He was drowning in air because enough of the atmosphere had reached his helmet intake in the final meters to sear the airway lining. His voice worked in fragments. He wanted the helmet off. Every rule said leave it sealed to the med station, and every rule assumed the sealed volume held something breathable, and his did not anymore. It held what the Cathava world exhales. I broke his neck ring with the emergency lever and got the helmet off him. The ammonia had left frost-white patches of skin gone leathery. His burned eyes streamed blindly, and swelling was already closing his throat from the inside. He said 2 things in the clean air. He asked if he had made the lock, and I said yes, and he seemed satisfied with the day on those terms. Then he worked the blind eyes toward where my voice was and said, "Finish the argument." His airway closed in the 5th minute. I did the surgical airway with the kit's blade at the cricoid line, by feel, blood over both my hands. It bought 2 more minutes because the swelling was below the cut too, all the way down. The whole tree scalded. The kit, the lock and my hands could only buy minutes. In the moment, the work filled everything until it ended. I sat on the lock floor with my friend, not moving, until Denton's voice on the channel said Hutchins had stopped the emplacement. The withdrawal of accommodation proved the tribunal could revert any volume at will, including the well where he stood. The package would never survive to detonation without consent, so the contingency was dead. He stopped, came down the 4 kilometers, and stood over Carter's body in the lock with his helmet under his arm. "He was the best of the 4 of us," Hutchins said. "They should have built their witness out of him." I stood up off the lock floor. After 19 days of proceeding and 11 chambers of forged dead, Hutchins had proposed an impossible specimen. A body built to serve the tribunal could reproduce Carter's shape, but not the choice he had made with his last breath. Their witnesses said what the tribunal needed said. Carter had said finish the argument. I filed the motion that night. The grammar had a form for it, ancient, translated into our language by the tribunal's own systems with what I would swear was reluctance in the rendering. A challenge to the integrity of a precedent witness, brought by a recognized examiner, heard before the full concord. The lit road came for me alone at what my body insisted was 4 in the morning. I went up it with the analyzer, the survey plots, Carter's 10 sweeps. In the axis well, the half-emplaced package still sat bolted to the rim. There I did the only thing I have ever been good at. I spoke for remains. I gave them the Larson, the true spectre of the burned world against the sworn testimony of peaceful dwindling. The cascade profile against the filament's quoted output, curve on curve. Then the systemic finding. 11 witnesses, 11 mismatches, bodies built elsewhere and installed, memories aligned to doctrine. I used their own grammar's language for it. A corrupted witness impeaches the record it anchors. I moved to impeach the record, all of it, every precedent, the entire evidentiary spine of the proceeding against my species. And I rested. The fragments in 9 cages hung still in a way I had never seen. Every current stopped, thousands of luminous pieces of the absorbed dead holding station, like a courtroom waiting on itself. The voices, when they came, conceded everything. The examiner's findings are accurate. The Larson refused containment. The Larson were terminated by stellar cascade. The reconstruction testifies to the choice the Larson would have made at a likelihood exceeding threshold had termination not occurred. The tribunal finds no corruption. The sentence and the history are the same object. I stood under that for a moment before I could work with it. You're saying the forgery is true because the lie was probable. We are saying your category of difference does not exist. You experience time as a line and call only the line real. This tribunal experiences likelihood as substance. A future at 98% is the event unattended. The Larson witness is accurate. Your scrubber is accurate. Your objection exposes anatomy, examiner. You are built to see one line. We are built to see the weather. Then the trial is anatomy too, I said. Answer a question on the record. In the history of this tribunal, across every species brought to threshold and judged in this well, how many were acquitted? How many did you find safe to release? The stillness in the cages lasted longer this time. No species has been acquitted, the voices said, because none deserved it, or because none could. I had the last plot in my hand and I turned it toward them, though I no longer believed they needed their assembled eyes to see. Every mind in those cages comes from a species that survived by accepting containment. That's the membership requirement. You told us so the first day. You just told it slowly. You are a jury of the caged, judging the crime of wanting out. You cannot acquit an expanding species, because every part of you that thinks is a part that chose the cage. And if expansion can ever be innocent, then the cage was never necessary, and every one of you died in prison for nothing. The plot shook at the end of my arm. I let it. So this was never a trial about our guilt. It's an intake interview. The only verdicts you have ever had are execution and enrollment. The fragments moved again. In the nearest cage they gathered, into the almost man, the 2 wide eyes, the seam of a mouth, and for the first time in 19 days, the overlapped voices spoke one short sentence. You have stated the available dispositions, the tribunal said. Shall we discuss the terms of enrollment? We negotiated for 2 days, the almost man and I, alone in the well, because the grammar permitted only the recognized witness on the floor. Hutchins, when I told him what the floor now was, said the words I had been waiting 19 days to hear from him. Then it's yours, Counselor. Then posted himself at the rim with Denton, and did not interrupt once. The tribunal began with the terms it had used before. Humanity would accept confinement. At extinction, or earlier by election, representative minds would enter the concord. The filament would remain as enforcement. The record would stand. Contribution to the concord is customary under enrollment, the voices said. Custom is not jurisdiction. The accused has been offered survival through enrollment rather than sentence. You offered to make us part of the court that cannot acquit us. That term is rejected. Strike contribution. The almost man came apart to the shoulders, fragments lifting and sorting, then assembled again. Contribution is struck from required terms. The offer remains available. The concession showed me what yes meant in that room. It marked a change entered because the grammar gave them no clean reason to refuse it. The impeachment had established predictive error. Innocence lay outside the tribunal's possible findings. On its own record and in its own grammar, the machinery had manufactured evidence to match its expectation. Error widened the margin. Mercy, they had told us on the first day, is uncertainty not used as a weapon. And I had spent 2 days of my species 26 making that margin as wide as the Varison's burned sky. I started with their score. You entered Hutchins's command claim, the preparation of the package, and the emplacement itself as evidence of human conduct. Those acts were entered as evidence of human conduct. Then conduct in this proceeding is admissible in both directions. Conduct favourable to the accused has been entered. Show me where. Glenn Carter entered a lethal environment to gather evidence your rules permitted me to examine. When his hand was destroyed, he completed the recovery before reporting the injury. When you withdrew accommodation, he kept reporting the failure until we understood what your action had done, then crossed 80 meters in a failed suit to reach the 1 volume you had exempted. Hutchins stopped the emplacement when he learned it could not succeed. Denton transported the device openly and claimed the choice as his own rather than hiding behind Hutchins's order. 4 people under one pressure made incompatible choices. Which one is the species? A limited sample does not supersede the assessed history. Then a limited sample cannot validate it either. You opened the proceeding when 3 of us crossed a threshold. You adjusted your estimate on our words, our equipment, our command structure, our attempts to survive. Either this sample has evidentiary weight in both directions, or every adjustment since contact is void. The fragments in the other cages accelerated. Any exchange among them occurred beyond every medium I could detect, while the almost man blurred at the edges as pieces entered and left it. The sample has weight in both directions, the voices said. The aggregate remains at threshold. Not yet. You contaminated it. The mouth seam held still. I put Carter's suit log into the well between us, his pressure trace, the field alarm, the exact second the accommodation failed. You placed the filament in our star before contact. You admitted us, prevented our departure, displayed an execution mechanism, controlled access to witnesses, watched us prepare a countermeasure, then changed the environment around a member of the accused while the proceeding was open. After shaping every available choice, you counted the choices as independent evidence of what we would do. In my work, when the examiner changes the remains and then testifies from the change, we do not call the result predictive. We call it contamination. The pressure applied is standardized. Against what control? They had answers for civilizations that had burned, surrendered, dwindled, and been reconstructed. They had no answer for that. The record already shows you're missing control, I said. It judges every unconfined species dangerous. Refusal always ends in termination, while each living witness is rebuilt. Your model has never survived a result it did not already allow. The process selects its answer before the test. The tribunal has persisted across intervals your species cannot represent. Age proves persistence alone. Repetition without an independent control adds no validation. For 11 hours, that was the argument. They would return to the physical consistency of the future apparatus. I would return to the Varison world, the line that had actually occurred and the witness they had manufactured because the occurrence did not fit. They would say likelihood was substance. I would ask which likelihood, generated by which membership, tested against what surviving alternative. They would say our score remained at threshold. I would make them separate the original estimate from the conduct they had provoked, the conduct they had observed, and the precedent records they had reconstructed. Near the end of the first day, the voices said, "The margin retained for predictive error is widened. Summary adverse verdict is no longer available." Their court had never needed a word for acquittal, and I knew better than to ask for one. What disposition is available? Continuation under constraint. State the minimum constraint. Their first version made the filament answer any human-made object crossing the heliosphere. That was extinction postponed by bureaucracy, a lost probe, a sail, rubble on the wrong trajectory. I made them distinguish expansion from observation, machine from crew, accident from decision. They resisted the distinctions because their model preferred species to acts. I used their own charge against them. If the danger was humanity permitted to expand, then the trigger had to be expansion, not matter. Their second version made the first crude crossing the trigger, but closed the proceeding as an enrollment verdict. I refused closure. Closure would make every forged precedent part of the final record and every future human act a violation of sentence. Continuation meant evidence could still change the assessment. Then I put the 11 sweeps into the record again. These reconstructions cannot remain as witnesses in a continued proceeding. They are preserved testimony. They are predictions wearing bodies. Keep the worlds. Keep the material record. Dismantle the speakers. If you call humanity again, gather evidence from the line we walk instead of the answer your court requires. The tribunal offered annotation. I refused. It offered disclosure of reconstruction status. I refused that too. A labelled prop remains a prop, and a witness built to remember a probability remains incapable of contradicting it. On the second day, the almost man stood before me with fewer pieces in its face than it had used before. I do not know whether that meant anything. The voices said, "The requirement is accepted. 11 precedent reconstructions will be dismantled. Future evidence concerning the accused will derive from observed history. Predicted material may be entered only as projection, not as witness, precedent, or substitute for observed history. Humanity would remain confined to its own system under an open-ended, reviewed probation. The filament would remain in the sun, dormant and self-maintaining, keyed to a boundary instead of a verdict. The first crude human vessel to depart the heliosphere would trigger it. Kestrel would depart on schedule. The proceeding would continue, their word entered in their grammar, an open case adjourned. The 11 forged witnesses would be dismantled, a term whose status as victory I have never been able to decide. The Larson shepherd would stop testifying in the silver grass. If the tribunal ever reconvened on humanity, it would need new evidence gathered from the line we actually walked, not the weather they expected of us. I signed it, a confinement order binding every human being who will ever exist. I was James Larson, a mortuary astronomer with a bad knee and no mandate from any living person. The alternative was the other verdict, and Whitfield's Chair Creek message had told me with perfect deniability that this was always going to be mine to carry. The tribunal marked the instrument in their fashion. A fragment detached from the nearest cage, a fossil piece of some judge older than my star, and dissolved into the document case's surface like frost going the wrong way, into the material, permanent. The examiner is advised, the voices said when it was done, that this tribunal has enrolled species before. Their minds serve in these cages. The offer remains open to yours, at your extinction or before it. I'll note it in the file, I said, took my species cage under my arm, and left the well. Kestrel departed on the 26th day. We watched the burn from Persistence's cupola, the three of us, with Carter in the cold store's deck below, wrapped in the flag Denton had insisted on cutting from a thermal blanket, because we had not brought a real one. Nobody had planned for the trip to need a flag. The object went out the way it had come in, breaking in reverse, a dark length swallowing its own light. Long after it was too small to resolve, the solar observatories could still find what it had left behind. The filament's signature remains in the sun's spectra, one thin line in the forest of lines, unchanged. A probate mark on the star. I always know where to look. The story Earth told itself was written before we docked. Kestrel was a derelict archive, automated, magnificent, dead. The crew were heroes. Glenn Carter was lost in an EVA accident conducting science that would inspire a generation. I sat in 19 briefings and contradicted none of it, because the true instrument, my testimony, the signed terms, the Larson spectra, all of it went into a compartment of the government so deep that Whitfield had to be temporarily promoted just to attend its meetings. He retired 8 months later, with a medal whose citation is itself classified. Before he went, he came to my lab once, unannounced, an old man in a good coat, and stood looking at the analyzer for a while. "They're complying, you know," he said, without ever being told why. That's the part I couldn't have predicted. He rested 2 fingers on the analyzer's case as if it were a headstone. The Interstellar probe program died in committee last month. Insufficient projected return. The Meridian Drive initiative got redirected. Solar infrastructure, power satellites, everything sunward. There are men in those rooms citing risk assessments they aren't cleared to understand voting the cage without knowing it's a cage. He looked at me. "Is that mercy, Doctor? Their kind or ours?" I told him I would let him know when I finished the analysis. He laughed once and left. I kept the lab. I kept the work. Dead worlds still arrive as dust and spectra. I still tell the journals how they ended. My identification rate is better than it ever was, because I have a new template in the library now, one I built myself from a survey plot and never published. 3 years on, it has matched twice. A burned world in the Cygnus direction, 1100 light-years out, flash-heated crust, stripped atmosphere, an engineered cascade in its dead star's history. And this past spring, another, closer, in a system our catalogues had flagged for its beautiful biosignatures back when I was in graduate school, reconstructing men from trays of bone. I worked that second one for a month to be sure. Then I sat alone in the lab at night with the completed entry on the screen, and in the cause of death field, where my professional life has always required a finding. I typed the only finding the remains support. Sentence carried out. The catalogue accepted it without comment. Somewhere in the dark between here and Cygnus, a courtroom 30 kilometers long is breaking toward its next defendant, its galleries, short 11 witnesses. I am the reason its next case will be harder to rig. That is the whole of what I won, and there are nights it is enough. The sun came up over the parking lot while I was still sitting there. I checked the daily spectra out of habit and found the thin line where it always was. I closed the file and I went home. The light I walked out under was ours, on probation, still burning.